Today on the PIO podcast, we are joined by Alicia Johnson, founder of Two Lynchpin Road, a communications platform focused on helping organizations connect more authentically with their audiences. Alicia brings a unique perspective on how narrative, transparency, and strategy come together to shape public perception. With experience guiding brands and leaders through complex messaging challenges, she understands what it takes to build trust in today's fast-moving information environment. Alicia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your name came up several times, and I'm like, I have to reach out and connect with you and learn a little bit more about you. So let's start here. What is Two Lynchpin Road, and what inspired you to create it?
So, Two Lynchpin Road is an emergency management boutique consulting firm. We work primarily with local and state jurisdictions to help build resilience and make those communities more prepared and ready for disaster.
So, when they bring you in, what are their most common communication breakdowns that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my background is as a public information officer. I started as a PIO in 2004, working for the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program. So if you want to know anything about chemical weapons, I got you covered. Now, as a contractor, people bring someone like me in to do one of two things. One, to work directly with stakeholders and engage with them specifically. And those could be members of the community. They could be members of your response or recovery team. So really looking at the gamut of who we consider stakeholders in response and recovery, and all the other parts of that emergency cycle. And or to specifically work on public information, whether that's alert and warning or building a joint information center or a joint information system, ensuring that public information officers themselves are well supported and ready for whatever Mother Nature or somebody else throws at them.
Excellent. All right. From your perspective, what separates agencies that communicate effectively from those that struggle?
Wow. I think particularly in the realm of emergency communications, the things that separate agencies who do well and agencies who struggle is trust. And that's not an easy fix, right? It's not like say this message better and you'll be successful. It's a lot more of build the rapport with your community, with your fellow agencies ahead of time before something bad happens. And that takes time and effort, and really some strong capacity to do that ahead of time. It takes some willpower to make that happen. So I think that the answer isn't really, some easy fix. Like if we just change these words, our audience will feel more safe. No, the reality is we need to have a deeper conversation with people before an incident occurs so that they know they can trust us for the most important information and we can trust them to make the most important steps when they need to.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that trust thing is a lot of agencies that's where they in the early stages they didn't deal with their communities right. They didn't talk to them, they didn't inform them, and then that trust really got destroyed. There's one community out in the Metro Chicago area here that had a water issue for years, and they never addressed it, kind of like what they did in Lansing, Michigan, to the lesser extent. But they the mayor out and out lied in a board meeting in regards to the quality of the water, and that just destroyed everything. It ended up there were criminal charges that came out of it because there was a cover-up that occurred. Talk about really public trust.
The interesting thing is that even when that mayor is no longer in office or, perhaps in jail, if there are criminal charges, that trust doesn't automatically be rebuilt.
Nope. No.
Right. Yeah, we now have a community who does not trust their political leadership. And so they are slower to act. And because of that, they are more likely to have been or to be negatively impacted by some kind of crisis.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Public sector communicators are expected to be accurate and transparent. Where do you see agencies unintentionally undermining their own credibility?
I think the leading one is not saying, I don't have the answer right now, or we don't know the answer right now. We're working on that. We're getting information to you as fast as possible. Another way of saying that is to make things up. right? We just
Yeah.
created something and we hope this is a good quote unquote placeholder statement. If there is not accuracy or truth in that placeholder statement, including, I don't know, we don't have the data, it doesn't exist right now, then you are losing trust instead of building it. Easier to say something and say, I don't know the answer, or this is what we know right now. And it might be wrong and it might change in the future than it is to make something up and then try to backtrack later. Because if a audience or a stakeholder member of the community can cross check the data, and now we can cross check everything, right? We have instant access to news. AI can help you cross check all the things, and AI is not entirely accurate either, but at least there's a mechanism there for people to go, this does not resonate with me. Something is off here. We're not being authentic to what's really happening. And now I've lost trust in the system or in that particular individual to make something go forward. So I think transparency is, as far as I'm concerned, particularly for public agencies, the most important thing you can have right now. And that takes a lot of guts
It
because
does.
it's hard to tell somebody this is happening. It's, the effects that are going to be downstream for you are not within our control. This is what we need you to do in order to stay as safe as possible. And, you know, we'll get back to you when we know more. And that's that's hard to deliver. That's a tough message to deliver.
It's very hard to sell it. I know, like, whenever I do training for Texas A&M, and we deliver FEMA courses mostly. So one of the things that we always tell people is, in the absence of having anything concrete that you can give out, and you still want to speak to the public, tell them what the process is going to be as you go. So what are you going to be doing to mitigate what has occurred? And as you do that, then you start releasing information once you have facts and so on. At least you're giving them something about what is going on, what you're doing to fix the problem, as
Yeah.
opposed to not saying anything.
Public information officers always have that triangle, the what, so what, now what kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I think there's also kind of a little sub piece on the side that's like, and here's what we are doing.
Right.
Right. So it's not like, hey, we want you to do this. And most people, Maletti said, people mill, right? We have, you request us to do something and we want to cross check with everybody and their dog first before we actually do it. That's human nature. We want to ensure we're making the right decision. And one of the best ways to do that or to cut that time is to say, here's what we want you to do. Here's what's happening. Here's what that means for you and what we need you to do. And also, here's what we are doing to help mitigate or to help the next steps or to make it better. Or, we're working around the clock to do X, Y, and Z. So there is an action that's saying we're asking you to take this action. And we ourselves as government or members of whatever organization are also acting. And together we're going to do something, whatever that is at the end. So I think that's a really big piece that is part of the transparency portion, right? It's part of that conversation, that bigger conversation you're having with your community. It's not a one-way thing. It's two.
Yeah, and this kind of goes to my next question. A lot of agencies push information out, but that connection is a different challenge. Where are they missing that mark to be able to connect with their community?
Well, I have heard of many communities, many counties, organizations shutting off comments on social media for legal purposes, right or wrong. I don't know what that looks like. I'm certainly not a legal expert. As a public information officer, it does make difficult to have quote unquote conversations online. However, I think we're getting now to the point, and maybe we've always been here, where real conversations and real resilience and community trust is built offline. It's not built in a Facebook group. It's not built by following your organization on Facebook. That's great metrics, but that doesn't equate to action. And so really having those deeper conversations with community groups, HOAs, your local 4-H club, parents at a school district meeting, something, right? So there's a deeper conversation with the people who actually live there, not just not just caught in the stream on your phone while you're scrolling through at midnight and you can't fall asleep. So I think that's the piece in terms of engagement. It's very tactile. You have to be able to actually perform the duties. And as a public information officer, many of them teams of one, that's really, really hard to do.
Many of them are teams of one or half of one because they don't even do it full time. All right, so and Mark Brady, I don't know if you know. No, I'm sorry, not Mark Brady. Now I'm losing who I want to talk about. The first hour is always critical. Now it's got to be down to almost like the first 10 minutes. What should be the top communication priorities for a PIO in that first hour?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the holding statement is critical, and I think that holding statement goes back to as much as you can fill in on that triangle that we talked about previously. What's happened? So what now? What kind of information I think is very critical. I think the other piece that ends up coming down to bite you, and this isn't necessarily something you do in the first 10, 30, 60 minutes, but it is something you need to lean forward and internally is that communication piece, right? Communication isn't one way. When we talk about communicating with people, we're talking about that dual capacity, right? We want information from them. We also want to address their concerns. And in order to learn about their concerns, they have to tell us. So we need that piece, whatever that is, open. And maybe that is, you talk to your local NGOs, you're talking to the key community leaders who are talking to your commissions, your board of supervisors, your city councils, something, right? Some piece where you're like, okay, I've got my finger on the pulse of what is happening. That isn't necessarily something that needs to happen in the first hour, but you got to line it up then so that you can continue to have those clear, open communications. Because as soon as you push out the holding statement, that secondary piece is going to start moving. And if you don't have your finger on the pulse, you're going to miss some urgent element at the very beginning that you could answer in the next holding statement and continue to gain trust. I think trust is easily lost and hard to gain. And in a disaster, even more so.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about speed and accuracy and tone all competing at once. How do you recommend prioritizing those in real time?
Wow.
And can you? That's the other question.
I'm hesitating because I'm thinking of like different disasters in my head, and I'm going, ooh, what's more important, speed or accuracy? And I think a lot of times the answer is it depends. Depends on the crisis. Oftentimes in disaster, it is speed that matters because you're going to tell people to stay, or in the case of an active assailant, you want them to run, hide, or fight. Right. Those are the actions. Those are like the selection of real criteria. Now, the message, the tone, that's a different story, right? Hopefully, you've spent a little bit of time or a lot of time crafting some of those early messages ahead of time, or using some of the great tools that exist out there to craft those messages so that you can create something that resonates with your community and just push and go. But I think speed is very important. Now, accuracy is right there neck and neck in terms of we're not trying to tell them information that is inaccurate. But if you are only at the very beginning giving protective action measures, stay or go, and this is why, then speed is the key. Now, accuracy is a little bit like this event is happening here, or maybe it's here, or we don't know, we don't have enough foresight to look at what's happening later on in the situation. And I think as you go throughout the disaster, accuracy becomes more and more important, right? It's like a horse race. Speed is out first, and then later on, accuracy comes in from behind and takes
Right.
away the lead. So I think that's a big part of it. But I don't think that, in the initial hour or the initial day, speed is the most important thing. Then it becomes more and more about accuracy, about telling the right story, the whole story, not the right story necessarily, but the whole story, because the community is already experiencing that whole story. And the idea that you're going to, have your own picture of what that looks like, if that ever existed, if that opportunity ever existed, it's long gone now.
Yeah. Okay. So many PIOs feel like they are reacting instead of driving a communication strategy. What needs to change internally for them to lead it more effectively?
Man, we're full of hard questions today.
Sorry about
I
that.
think that I think one of the biggest things is having the ear of leadership. So that might be your director, but it could be the person above your director. It could be both of them. For somebody who is in a public information role half time, that can be really hard. It can be very difficult to get the attention, the buy off of the people that you need. I think one of the best ways to do that is to use best practices and tools that are already being tested and worked on by folks in the community, whether those are large cities and they're tailored now for small communities, or academics who are doing great research that have tools we can use. I'm thinking of Dr. Jeanette Sutton and her work with the Warren Room. Things like that that can easily be extracted for public information officers who are in communities that are small and who need real direction. I think one of the biggest things is, just being able to have a very transparent conversation with your leadership. And that is tough. That is very hard because not every single leader wants to hear what's happening. And they don't necessarily want to be made aware. And in that case, again, drawing on those best practices. Hey, this happened in this community. Look, we could have a similar incident here. Here's how we could fix it. Or here's a great success story. Here's what we should do and implement in order to be more like community A, who had a great success story, and less like community B that is wallowing in the mire. So I think there's a little bit of, show and tell kind of, but having those really deep conversations.
And this kind of goes to my next question. How important is that alignment between leadership and the PIO during that high pressure situation?
I think it's absolutely integral. If you are not on the same page, those leaders, policymakers of any type, whether they're your director or they're from your city or county council, they're going to step into something that you are not prepared for. And they may do that anyway. But being able to have some conversation with their staff, being able to kind of understand a little bit about how they communicate, who they're communicating to, why they might talk out of turn, those things are really, really very important and valuable to know ahead of time. There's no way as a public information officer you're going to be able to solve all these problems before everything goes, the wrong way, right? The only thing we can say is that we have the capacity to better prepare ourselves. And by doing that we give ourselves the tools we need to more effectively communicate with those around us, whether that's externally to the community or internally to our fellow stakeholders, and have a better regime of, a better holistic, expectation of what is going to happen, and also how we can best communicate. Ideally, getting everyone on the same page is like super simple, snap of a finger. We're all talking off the same page and we all know what we're saying, and we're saying the same message, maybe in different words, but we're all like pushing the ball forward. That's unrealistic. That's a great striving expectation, but it's unrealistic. So how can you get there, a little bit closer every time?
Yeah, in your firm, so in your experience, you guys get called into these agencies that are experiencing a crisis. Whether, I should say this, you get called in there and you find out there's a crisis going on, and then from your background, you look at them and you say, okay, they didn't do any there's no planning, there's no strategic plan, there's no crisis communication manual, or if they had it, it's on a shelf, it's never been opened, that kind of stuff. Are those common issues that you see coming in when you go into some of these organizations?
Yeah. So a lot of the folks that we work with, whether we're writing crisis communication plans specifically, or we're working on another plan and communications plays a role in all of those plans, what we often see is one of two things. One, as you mentioned, the plan is there, but it's a very expensive doorstop and no one's ever opened it. It's not realistic if they have opened it. So they look at it and go, yeah, no, that will never work here. Some consultant, hit Control F and find and replace and put our name into something, and it's not real. It's not logical. Like, it just doesn't fit our current needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens a lot. Right. That happens a lot with a lot of consulting firms, even with a lot of local plan writers who are in the community. They're pulling down a template, they're putting stuff in, and they're not necessarily vetting it with the current situation on the ground. Right. So that's one thing. The other piece that happens is that there's nothing. that the plan that they wrote has not ever considered what it will be like to communicate with any audience, whether it's external or internal. It's like, oh yeah, every AAR I have ever read, and probably you too, says communication is a problem. Every
Mhm.
single AAR. There is not one that doesn't
Yep.
point to some version of communication went totally belly up somewhere along the scope and scale of our event. And yet most plans don't address it, or they address it in some boilerplate paragraph that has nothing to do with how you actually communicate with the place that you're in. And that's the problem. Right? That's at the root of the issue. That's part of why communications doesn't work, because we don't talk about it.
And it's always an afterthought in a lot of organizations too. There's always, oh yeah, we'll deal with it when it happens, right? I mean, that's the
Yeah,
way,
most people aren't PIOs, so they
right?
think that the issue can be solved with more talking.
Right.
Right? The
Right.
issue can be solved if I stand up at the podium and give a great statement. Except that doesn't account for the fact that someone else also had to hear it, internalize it, and then act on it.
Right.
And without that closed part of the loop, having a brilliant statement from a podium is less than half, less than 50% of the actual equation.
How can leaders communicate clearly without sounding overly scripted or disconnected?
Oh, yeah.
Or I should say tone deaf?
Yeah. I think the best way not to be tone deaf is to understand your community. Is your community folksy? Is your community academics? Is your community a, a bit of both? And it doesn't necessarily have to be from the podium, but like that, you go to an HOA meeting and, as a PIO, you prep the person who's going to be there. You say, these are the types of people you're going to see. There's going to be, college educated people. There's going to be people who are elderly, who have no idea how to use the internet. There's going to be parents with kids who are going to be distracted because their kid is supposed to be doing homework, but he's goofing around on a screen, whatever the situation is. And so understanding that audience and then being able to connect to each portion, I think, is the best way. Now, does one statement do that? No, probably not. Right? That's why, like, having multiple channels, multiple ways of connecting, tapping into those core community leaders who can also help amplify your message. They're trusted members of your community. They should help. They can, if the relationship is there, they can help you translate and get effective conversations out. I think a good way to kind of explain it is like when you're a boss, when you're a leader in your organization and you are talking to all your employees, you do not talk to them in the same way.
You shouldn't.
Every employee you approach every employee in a different way, with a different set of connection, a different way of talking to them, a different way of sharing the task or the urgency at hand. And you should be doing that with every single core group of your community. It's not
Yep.
easy. It takes a lot of
No,
work.
no, it's not. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked about how important transparency is, that's the expectation now, to be as transparent as you can. Where's the line between being transparent and protecting operational integrity, like of an investigation?
Yeah, I think that is a very critical piece. There is absolutely a line there. Humans are naturally curious. They want to know. They will continue to ask you, whether they're reporters or somebody else, they will continue to ask you for cause or why it happened or some version of speculation. And that's not available at this time. And it will, eventually it becomes available, right? With due process and due diligence. But at the time, often those things are not available. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a really great citizen or investigative reporter who's going to come up with the answer, who's going to do their own version of investigation and figure it out. And then you might be a little slow-footed on the back end in terms of like, yes, we hear that has been found out and yada yada, but your job as a government leader is to protect the integrity of the investigation, should there be one. Now, natural hazards don't often have those, but sometimes they do, because there's other things that happen during hurricanes and other places where you do have an issue where there is an investigation. So I think, again, being transparent that there is an investigation, that data and evidence are being gathered. And when we are at a point where we can release that information and share more fully, we will. Now, is it going to be released with or without your permission? Probably, because that's the era that we live in now. People are investigating on their own, and they can find that information and or speculate, even if it's not correct, on their own.
Right.
And so there is a big, it's a fine line for sure, but your job is to protect the sanctity of, what eventually may become a court proceeding. And that is a different entity altogether.
I get it. Okay, so let's talk accountability. What does that look like from a communication standpoint during a high stake incident like a hurricane or a some kind of natural disaster? And let's talk about the
Yeah. Let's talk about the fires in LA. Accountability is to your community. I think that's, I won't speak on behalf of every public information officer, but that is certainly the trend, and the belief that we are accountable to our community first, especially in a crisis where we're asking them to do something urgently needed so that they can protect themselves and potentially their property. And then accountability is to the greater community at large, and hopefully your organization is a part of that in terms of what that looks like. But we're not necessarily, I don't know that we're necessarily accountable to the organization we represent. Yes, we want to represent them in a good light. We want them to be seen as trusted with our community and our stakeholders. And that is very, very critical. And also, when you're issuing an evacuation order, it's about the people on the ground. It's not about, you're, making my organization look flashy and cool and, well received or have a great visual, right? That's a totally different kind of accountability. So I think that's the key for me. Whenever I was working as a public information officer, it was about what is in the best interest of the community that we are serving right now. And that's the ultimate moral accountability, in my personal opinion.
and that kind of goes to the next question: how should agencies handle situations where the message has to change as new information comes in, and especially in natural disasters, that happens pretty frequently.
Yeah,
Where
every
they
message
get
has to change.
right,
What you
right,
put off in the beginning is not what ends up in the
right.
end, right? You're in a constant state of change. And I think you set that out early, when you're communicating about a hurricane or a wildfire. This is happening. Here's where we're currently asking people to evacuate. It's X% contained that we know of. Maybe we don't know the containment numbers. We don't know the cause yet. In the case of a wildfire, in a hurricane, we may not necessarily know where it's directly headed. We have a really huge cone instead of something tiny, which is what you end up with, right? So every single message is, this information will change. And I think that's one of the things that you set at the very beginning in terms of, now what? We gave you this information. We want you to be prepared, and we'll be back in 2 hours, 4 hours,
Before.
whatever it is, to change this message, because that's what we're doing. The situation changes and we give you more information. And I think that's the key. Instead of saying this idea of public information is one thing, we have one statement, we hold to the statement, and we have, a very beautiful visual about it. In emergency communication, if your information's not changing, then it's not an emergency. Right? It's you're at stasis. So every time you get in front of the camera, I think things change in a disaster. In a daily crisis or in something that's more slow moving, no, probably not. Right? But certainly in the very first hours of response, absolutely. Once you get into recovery, I think that's a deeper question about how do we can continue to incorporate our community more effectively over time. Because even though the message hasn't necessarily changed, because we're in an area of stasis and things are more controlled, we still need them to participate, to connect, to be a part of the recovery itself. And recovery in most natural disasters is very long and very arduous, and also incredibly complicated. And without their participation and understanding the process right? And some of that comes from public information in terms of communicating which steps go where and how long each step takes, right? Permitting is very long
Hmm.
in most places. That allows you to make a better transition or a better understanding of where you want to be down the road. Recovery is not a 12-month process. Recovery is many years process.
Right. If a PI wanted to immediately improve how their agency communicates, what are one or two suggestions you would recommend?
Off the top of my head, the very first thing I would focus on is alert and warning. That's the first message communities hear from you in a crisis. It needs to be tight, well understood, easy to see on your phone or hear if a reporter is pushing it back out through television or radio or something like that, if people even listen to the radio these days. Something like that. I would focus specifically on alert and warning. There are some great free tools that do that. The other thing I would do is focus on building the trust with your community ahead of time. And that can, that's not, hey, we had a expo and we talked to 1,000 people in a booth. That is not, we went to, the neighborhood fair and we had set up a table. It's much more deliberate than that. We are not trying to give people information and say, you should be prepared and here's a great thing to line your trash can with. That's not the goal. The goal here is to have individual conversations with people who that end up resulting in action. The best way to do that is to talk to trusted organizations in the community, in the neighborhood. That might be religious groups, that might be social clubs, it could be something else, and work with those organizations to help bridge the gap between the government and the community as a whole,
Right.
and work through trusted agents, trusted parties.
How should agencies evaluate whether the communication is actually effective? Is there a metric or a way to evaluate it?
That's a really good question. There's not a good standardized metric now, right? There's lots of different metrics. We
Right.
can look at whether your initial alert and warning meets certain thresholds and is your message easy to review, right? So there's a piece for that. We can certainly look at like things like readability of a press statement. And, are you speaking at a grade level that most people will understand? Sixth grade is usually the fifth to
Hmm.
sixth grade is usually the standard. So there's ways to do that. Now, is there a way to like some master metric across your entire public information or education campaign or development capacity to say we are at or above level? Not really. I think there's lots of organizations who say they have a metric, and some of those metrics might be effective, but they are certainly not universal. And so I think a lot of that is maybe a little test, a little trial and error is involved there. And frankly, because your community is always changing, your residents are moving in, they're moving out, your residents are aging, new residents are being born, you know, um, people are changing their jobs, they're becoming parents, they're becoming grandparents, they have new concerns, they have different concerns. Your communication strategy has to change with them. And there's no metric that's going to be able to measure consistently across the board. Yep, we're on par with a snapshot of your community from 10 years ago. Well, then you're not on par because
Right.
that's old.
I appreciate you saying that because there are so many chiefs that just, I want a metric. I want to know. I want statistics. I want to know how many likes
Yeah.
or, that's, you
That's
can't,
why social media is so popular in terms of like, oh, I have 100,000 followers on Facebook. Cool. How many of those people live in your community? I don't know. How many of them actually act when you ask them to do something? I have no idea. Okay, well then that metric's useless. Because
yeah,
what we're
yeah.
trying to
And that,
do isn't like pat ourselves on the shoulder, yay, we got some more followers today. We're trying to actually create real sustainable action. And that does not happen without actual connection. You don't get
yeah,
action from a Facebook page.
no. And that's why I really dislike sentiment dashboards because they are just a snapshot in time. They're not all the time. It's just a snapshot of what's going on. And it can be so manipulated by bad
Yes.
actors and
Yeah.
bots and
I
stuff like that.
mean, what is the quote about statistics, damn statistics? And, it's like every single thing. You can make the numbers say anything you want them to say.
Yep. Yeah, I always remember that accounting thing, what's 1 plus 1? And he goes, "Well, what do you want it to be?"
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
it can be anything. We could say we're reaching this number of people. Okay, great, but now split it up by age group. Are you
right.
reaching the people who, okay, so you're reaching mostly over 65, which, okay, great. Maybe that's the vast majority of your communities. However, we're not reaching the under 35s, or the over 65s are dependent on their children who are between the ages of 35 and 65, or 35 and 60 or something like that, who are going to be the ones to help them evacuate. Well, who cares if you're reaching grandma if you haven't reached her ride, right? Like,
Right,
I care. And also, the
right.
person who's going to give her a ride to a safe place and to help keep her, calm and not have a panic attack or something worse, hasn't been, your messaging's not reaching that audience. Okay, so that's not really helping us, because we have to reach both of those things. And even though we don't necessarily live in places where parents and children, where we live with multiple generational, multi-generational families, we often live with, very nuclear families and grandparents are way off or whatever. You still have to be able to communicate to all types of individuals. And frankly, not to mention that there's lots of people who do not speak English as a first language in this country.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so being able to communicate with those individuals in a way that is appropriate for them and also not aggressive towards them is absolutely key, right? You can't go into certain communities in a uniform and expect to be received, because that is a trigger for a lot of them. And then you have, it's even triggers in people in communities where English is the primary language spoken.
Yeah,
So,
sometimes the education level is the one that triggers it too, because you have more people that are academically knowledgeable and they get angry.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah.
All right, so with AI and misinformation and faster news cycles and the need to be first but not necessarily accurate, how does that shift communication strategies for public agencies?
I think we're still learning that. I'm actually really curious to see what this year's hurricane and wildfire seasons look like, knowing how far AI has come in the last year,
Yeah,
right? Last year, the LA fires, for example, Hurricane Helene, we did not have to worry about AI in that way in relationship to messaging. We maybe used AI for some prognostication about direction of the storm or fire direction or fuel or things like that, right? We might have used some additional data tools in that area, but we didn't have to worry about it in the way that we do now. So I think that's going to really change the nature of communication over the next 12 months, even over the next 6 months. And most public information officers, I don't know. I think most public information officers don't know. They're just kind of like hanging on, white knuckling it a little bit in terms of what's next. How do we become responsive? How do we use these tools to help ourselves grow and have a better message and counter some of the rumor control that needs to be done, right? And there's always been a need for rumor control, AI aside. We've always had that issue. Now it's just, as you mentioned, the speed of things is going to really
yeah.
change the game, I think.
What skills do PIOs need to develop right now to stay effective over the next couple of years?
Well, I think one is to be a person of the people, right? I was going to say a man of the people, but generally to be connecting with your community. And that means to be out there, to be friendly, right? To not be standoffish or something like that, to be connected with them. In some ways, counteracting some of the technology that we're always seeing. Like, we are not robots, we're real humans, and we really care. And we're hopefully educated enough about the hazards that our community faces that we can help people feel more safe. So I think that's one thing, right? To be more human. And then I think the other piece of that is to understand the tools that are, quickly coming to the marketplace, whether you're buying them or not, to just understand what they can do, how you as a PIO can use them. And that if you do choose to use tools like AI, that you're always cross-checking that data, because it's not accurate. It's using a large language model that is very sanitized and simplified and often does not pull from good high quality sources. And we don't want to, if we're working on being more human, we certainly don't want our statements to sound robotic and like they were created by a machine. So I think there's a big, it's like being of two different types of worlds, right? Being more human and more connected to our community, and also knowing that there's tech tools that we need to use in order to be more effective every single day.
If you could leave a PIO with one piece of advice about communications in today's environment, what would it be?
I think the advice I would say is that connection is the most important currency public information officers have. And if we cannot connect with our communities, with our stakeholders of any kind, are doing something wrong. We're missing the boat, right? So I think the biggest piece is, what does it take to build connection with your community? Think about that and then go and do it.
I like that. Is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered?
I don't know that there was any question that we missed necessarily. We talked a lot about response. I think the other piece is that long tail of recovery, and that communication during recovery is very, very different. The speed of things is different. I think technology is going to play a huge role in how that works now. Not to mention that there are still some undetermined changes at FEMA in terms of how recovery works, right? We don't know what that will look like. We
Right.
have a new acting or former new, I don't know what we call a new person. He's newly appointed, newly acting, but he's
Right.
previously there, right? And so I think that there's going to be some changes in terms of what that looks like as a public information officer. And I also think the other piece that's part of that is that, it's really easy in the initial stages of a crisis to get going, to do, to run on adrenaline as a public information officer. And then it's also very easy to burn out when recovery starts to happen and you hit that long tail. Except as a community, that's where they need you the most. And so being able to continue to maintain your capacity by taking care of yourself and ensuring that you have appropriate support through all stages, I think is really critical. And also something that we don't talk about very much in terms of taking care of ourselves when we're talking about, crafting statements and being the first to get that information out. There is a cost for speed, right? You want to be fast, you want to be accurate. And then that also means like you're probably not getting a lot of sleep in the first 2 weeks of an event.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so let's lighten this up. Let's go to some rapid fire questions.
Yes.
Phone call, voice memo, FaceTime. What's your go-to for staying connected?
It depends on who it's with, but probably phone call.
Streaming binge or weekend read? What's your ideal escape?
Reading, 100%.
Morning rituals, sunrise workout, quiet coffee or tea, or a news scroll?
Ooh, well, I have an 8-year-old kid, so morning ritual is
Doesn't exist.
make a smoothie and run out the door.
Yeah. If you could adopt any animal, real or mythical, what would it be?
A moose. I love moose.
What's one song that always gets you moving no matter the mood?
Thunderstruck. AC/DC for sure.
Yep. Teleportation or time travel?
Time travel.
Play it safe or roll a dice? What's your instinct in a crisis?
Ooh, always roll the dice.
Which historical figure would you want to shadow for a day, not just meet?
Patton, I think. General
I
Patton.
like that, Pat.
Yeah.
Adult drink of choice.
Oh, I don't usually have adult drinks. I'm not a big drinker.
You got kids, you're running around, right? Yeah, I get it.
I would probably gravitate towards a sour beer.
There you go. I was laughing when you said I don't have time in the morning. It's a smoothie and run. My wife and I were just talking about this. You know those electronic boards with all your schedules and stuff that
Yes.
you can put on your fridge? She goes, they stole my idea. I had that years ago. And I said, yeah, if you would have done it, we would have been rich. But I go, we can get one now. She goes, why? It's just us. All of our kids are gone. We have nothing on our schedule.
We have like a big paper calendar that sits on our wall. And I started doing it when my son was a few years younger, because he would always be like, what day is it? What are we doing today? So it's like a nice way to visually see that. But sometimes he'll pick up my phone and he'll pull up the calendar app and he's like, oh, Mom, your day is like, what are all these things? And I'm like, you don't want to know. Good. It's fine.
Yeah, you don't want to know.
We get you to school, we pick you up. Everything is good, right? And he's like, yeah, but whoa. I was like, it's a busy day. So
Yes.
Just go with it. Help me out.
There you go. All right. So let's talk about some final thoughts. What key points would you like listeners to take from today's interview?
I think the key points are, one, trust is really important and it can't be replicated by a machine. It's just the thing that, we have to work towards. And it's not, I don't know that we hit on this, but it's not only the responsibility of the public information officer, right? Trust is about all of the organization working to build trust with your community and your stakeholders at large. That's not the responsibility of only one person. That's the responsibility of everyone. And so being able to help communicate that and drive that mission forward, I think is really key. And then I think the other piece that's really key is that pre-event planning piece, right? Being at least nascently aware of how to deal with some of the crises that are going to come your way, whether they come your way while you're the PIO or you're just preparing it for the next public information officer. Do everybody a favor and start that work now so that you're ready to go when something happens.
Right. As we wrap this up, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto you live by?
There's a lot. I'm looking around in my office. There's a lot of quotes around here. I think that there's actually a quote by Hemingway. I have it written down. Now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with what there is. And I think for me, that is like the quintessential emergency management piece in terms of like, we don't have all the information. We don't have this. Where's that person? They're not available. Who's going to do, yeah, there's some gaps. But what we do have is this. And we need to go forward with what we have at that time and do the best that we can. And then as we get more information, more people come to the scene, more trust is built. We're able to then act with that. So the idea of it's not a time to dwell on all the things you're missing, but instead to think about, well, what do we have? And can we use what we have in order to be as effective as possible?
Right. Right. I get that. All right. How can people best reach you if they want to connect, enlist your services, or follow up on anything we talked about?
Yeah, sure. You can always check out our website. It's twolynchpinroad.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Alicia D. Johnson. And you can always send me an email, alicia@twolynchpinroad.
I will add all that in the show notes. Alicia,
Great.
thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.